Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to talk about being lean and eating clean. I'm joined with Faz Lifts, and we're going to discuss if being lean and eating clean sets an unhealthy example. Before we get into this topic, if you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. The best topic ideas we turn into videos just like this. All right, joined by Faz Lifts. Faz, where can they find you on the YouTubes and social media?
Hey folks, check me out on Faz Lifts on YouTube and also on major podcast platforms.
So let me set the table here, Faz. Let's dive in. I made a video. Greg Doucette talked about Athlean X, and I'm not an Athlean X apologist. He puts out a lot of bad advice, and he can put out some good advice. So this really isn't about his advice. But Doucette put out a video saying basically Athlean X, his leanness, and in that same box, his dietary strictness is kind of setting an unhealthy example. So I want to focus on that because set Athlean X aside a little bit. We have an individual that's super lean, and the big part of this is that he's eating super clean. Faz, let's dive in. Does that set an unhealthy example?
Okay, so I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is, does just the way a person presents themselves and chooses to live their life? So Jeff prefers to be lean and he prefers to eat clean. Now, I don't watch a great deal of Jeff's material. And in fact, this is a bigger question than Jeff. Let's just broaden it out to everyone, anyone on social media. So can we say that person who decides to stay lean and eat clean, are they actually making a statement with that? Are they making a judgment call? I think that's the first thing to question. I would say they're not. They're living their life the way that they want to live their life. Now, unless they're going on to YouTube and saying, hey, if you're not like me, then you're fat, I think that's a different matter. I think the first thing is Jeff, as far as I know, or anyone else like Jeff, they're lean. They prefer being lean. They prefer eating clean. Fine. Good for them. Should we apply a morality to that? I don't think we should.
I guess a bigger question when you peel back this onion is, are we to stop any type of behavior that we enjoy that's not inherently unhealthy for us because somebody else might turn that into an unhealthy behavior? I think that's the bigger question here that's at play. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember when I was getting ready for my contest a few years ago. I was very lean. I had veins everywhere. And one comment I got at the gym was, that doesn't look healthy. But so it was quite strange. Like, I never said anything about my leanness. I carried on doing what I did. I trained with my weights, but I specifically remember one of the guys at the gym came up to me and said, look, that you don't look healthy. And it was strictly down to my level of leanness and my vascularity. Now, I would say that actually the bigger problem in that situation is the judgment that this other person is placing upon these very lean people who choose to live their lives. So as I said, the first issue is being lean making a statement, or people just living their lives a statement? Whereas I think other people judging them, that's probably a bigger problem. And I think especially in today's society, when I would argue probably the bigger problems we have is obesity and people not being in shape, is it really something that we want to do, to walk around and say, actually, you look so unusual, you're so lean, actually, you're the problem? I don't know if that's something that I want to encourage.
There's so many layers to this. When I heard this comment, to be fair, the thing that traveled through my small pea brain was that Athlean X is very lean compared to his base. Greg Doucette is extremely lean compared to his base, and Greg has more muscle mass. You're extremely lean compared to your base. Bald Omni Man, who I've been watching a lot lately, really a big fan, is extremely lean compared to his base. And we could go on and on and on with this. To any of these guys, the Bald Omni Man, Greg Doucette, Athlean X, they live a much stricter lifestyle than their basis. So it's a matter of degrees. But at some point, anybody that's successful has to be a little bit unbalanced, has to be, and that doesn't mean it's unhealthy, right? But they have to go all in or nearly all in on something to achieve, to achieve something good, to
Yeah.
achieve something, to achieve that level of success.
Yeah. So if we let's take Paris for a second, Bold Omni Man. Let's take him for a second. And I watch a fair bit of his stuff, and I've never once heard him pass a judgment on somebody else to say that they're fat if they're not as lean as he is. So I don't think we can say about Paris or anyone like him that they are setting a bad example. If anything, he's setting a very good example. I think the people who will turn around and say, okay, that person, that famous person being very lean is setting a bad example, I think they're the ones with the problem. So again, I don't watch Jeff, but I do watch Paris. And if anything, he's a very, very positive role model. So I think we need to separate what's going on here. And in the case of the person who actually is being lean and just living his life versus the person that's saying, hey, you're too lean, you're setting a bad example, I think that second person is in the wrong here.
So, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. Over the years, I've had acquaintances and friends who were very close to Jeff. And, I've never met Jeff. I've never been to his little, thing he does in Florida, but I've had friends that were down there. And, outside of Jeff's information, he seems like a pretty down to earth, reasonable, just normal guy that's detached from his information. And I'll be the first to say that some of his information bothers me. But as a human, he seems pretty normal, pretty average type of guy. And I don't really think what Jeff does, and this is just my opinion, is like an eating disorder. For Jeff, it's just normal living. If we go back in time to Clarence Bass,
yeah,
and a lot of you guys don't know who Clarence Bass is, but I implore you to research. He coined the phrase ripped. He put out the book Ripped. Back in the Arnold era, you had Arnold and then you had Clarence Bass, who was ripped, shredded. He was the creator of this whole world, this whole path. And I interviewed him a while back, Faz, and he said at age 70, his testosterone levels were normal. He doesn't stray on his diet. He eats plant-based, he eats meat-based. And is Clarence Bass a bad example? He's ripped at 80, right? Is he a bad example? Or can we look at a guy like that and say, this guy spent 60 years taking care of himself to this level? Is it an eating disorder? Maybe there's part of part of it is disordered in a sense, but it's not. I look at things like this. Is it destroying relationships? Is it destroying friendships? Is it creating a false sense of reality for you? Or is it just part of a lifestyle you enjoy?
Yeah, well, Steve, you took the word right out of my mouth. So the next thing I was about to say was, when it comes to eating disorders and disordered eating behavior, it's not defined by the activity itself. It's defined by the feeling you have about the activity and also the effect it has on your life. So if one guy has a blowout on a Saturday night, has a bunch of pizza, has a bunch of beers, wakes up the next morning, doesn't even think about it, goes on with the rest of his life, fine. It's not a problem, because there's no emotionality or morality attached to that. If another guy has a blowout on a Saturday night and he's just devastated and it affects him the entire next day, it starts to become a problem. So it's the assigning morality and emotion to food choices and leanness that is what causes problems. And so this goes back to what I'm saying. I think the person pointing the fingers, pointing at you there, I think the person pointing the fingers is the one who's actually at fault here. Now, because I don't know Jeff or at all, and I say I don't watch his content, so from the surface, I can't tell if there's any sort of disordered eating going on. That I have no idea. I don't know what he does in his kitchen. I don't know how he manages his diet really. But I will say, I know people who are as lean as him year round. I coach one of them. One of my clients who's just starting a bodybuilding show, he's that lean year round. He just doesn't have a very big appetite. He's always missing meals. And that there are people like that. We don't know. But as I say, I think when it comes to eating disorders and disordered eating, which is a large part of what this discussion is based around, it's the emotion that you attach to the behavior. So if we have people out there doing the shaming, shame on them. Those are the ones who have the issue, I say.
Well, to one of your points, I know and have coached people that are naturally lean. There was a young gentleman, Josh, who I worked with very early on in his teens, and he did not have an eating disorder. He was absolutely beyond shredded. He looked like Athlean X, and as a teen. And I've worked with adult males and some adult females that were ripped. My daughter's ripped, and my daughter eats Kit Kats every day. There's no disorder. So we need to separate. We need to be able to separate, compartmentalize these things a little bit. Like someone could be ripped and not be extreme. They can feel okay. There's such a narrative that floats around that if you're lean or ripped, you're unhealthy. And I know, Faz, I don't know about you, but other than competitors that were going into the last 2 weeks of a show, people that are able to maintain leanness year round naturally, and they don't have eating disorders, they don't feel unhealthy. They're just, they're like us.
Yeah, right. I think that's a great point. I'm loving this discussion so far. And I want to just broaden out something else as well. Here's something which I think the audience can relate to, and I certainly can. When I was, all throughout my life, when I was prepping for my show, my bodybuilding show a few years ago, and also after that, years after that, people are a lot happier to make comments about your muscularity and your leanness than they would be if you were overweight and making comments about your weight, if that makes sense. People are far more, I remember being on a night out. I was on a night out with some friends, and I was out, and we were outside a club, and this older lady comes up to me and grabs my arm here, right? And she just refuses to let go. And she was about 15 years my senior, and in her mind, I think she'd had a few to drink. In her mind, she was being kind of flirty. But I didn't want any of that attention. I was there with my friends. I was taken at the time. And so I remember thinking to myself, what if the tables were turned? What if I did that to somebody else? That would be horrible. Why is it acceptable to do that to somebody who's lean and muscular? Do we just assume that they're okay with it? In the same way, if somebody is very lean, why does it seem to be okay to be able to make comments about that person? Yet if we turn the tables, and let's say somebody who's very overly fat, why would it be socially a disaster to turn around and say, hey, you've put on 20 pounds. What the hell's going on? I think there's a double standard there. And I've been on the receiving end of that, and it's not nice. So what are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, I think this double standard can, when you look at the core of what Greg Doucette is saying here, and you shine a light on it, you can almost see a double standard appearing. And let me explain what I mean. The core of what Doucette is saying is that Athlean X is dangerous because those that follow him he sets an unhealthy example and could potentially pull those who are following him down a road to unhealthiness or eating disorders or whatever. So I think that's a part of what Doucette is saying here. He's dangerous. What else could it mean, right?
Yeah.
But if you get somebody on social media that's glorifying drinking or glorifying weed, or it can be healthy or unhealthy behavior, glorifying ultra running, glorifying really heavy 1 rep max attempts. They're like, is Doucette worried about the folks that are doing the opposite. What's worse? I don't know if I'm making sense here, but
No,
like,
I get you. I get you. Yeah. I mean, I'd ask you a question, Steve. How much of this do you think is him potentially covering up statements that he's made in the past, which have been very sort of, potentially aggravating in the same direction he's accusing Athlean X of, if that makes sense?
no, I don't know. Like, I recall Doucette making a video like, if you don't have abs, you're fat.
Right.
I find that more dysfunctional and disordered and
Yeah.
over the cliff than somebody like Athlean X or Clarence Bass just enjoying their lifestyle and eating the way they do. I find it way beyond the pale compared to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And so when I look at social media content, so let's say I look at your content for the running, the lifting, I get motivated by that, I get fired up by that. I don't feel bad about it. Let's say I look at somebody else's like Alex Battle for Destiny, and I look at him getting all strong and it's fantastic. It's good. It's a very positive trait. In the same way, if I did look at Athlean X, Jeff's content for getting lean, I'm sure I'd be very motivated by it. Surely that's what people look to that content for. They look at it without the emotion attached to it, like without the guilt. Now, if you've got a guy turning around and saying, "Oh, don't watch that guy," because he's setting a bad example, well, I don't know. I just think he's potentially assigning morality and emotion where there doesn't need to be any, and it's putting maybe bad shade on Jeff.
Do you think this is almost a degree of wokeism in a sense, meaning, like all of us, each of us, me, you, I'm sure Doucette, Athlean X, to a degree, we, regardless of what we believe in our philosophies, I think there's a degree of, there's a filter. We try to make sure we put out the best information so people get on the best path, don't hurt themselves, etc. Right? But if you get to the point where, something that's a good example, eating clean, we're worried about how everybody's going to react. Like, if I go out and run, should I stop running because a potential of 1% might abuse themselves?
Yeah. Or feel bad about it. Yeah.
Right. Or should I not eat clean because 1% might abuse it? Is that my responsibility for the fringe? Or, is this a little bit of like wokeism? Like, you need to, like, why should we stop what we're doing because 1% might abuse it? You can apply that to anything at any time. And obviously there's degrees. Like, if I had a channel where I'm just encouraging people to get, to binge drink and party and glorifying that and glorifying cigarette smoking and forms of self-abuse, that's taking people that are already in a hole and, helping them dig deeper. But when you have a positive thing, and clean eating is a positive thing, exercise is a positive thing. If you have a positive thing, you're still going to have 1% that could potentially abuse it. So in a sense, this is almost like a degree of wokeism to me. Like, let's stop everything in case the 1%, explodes.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's quite a lot to say on that. So I was on another podcast recently, and we were talking about the responsibilities that we have as content creators. And one of the reasons I don't give a lot of life advice on my channel is I used to be a school teacher, and I take the responsibility of being an authority figure very seriously. So I don't want to give out a great deal of life advice, because in my position as an authority on like weights and diet and whatever, I don't want to influence people in an area where I'm not a specialist in. Now, I don't put anyone down who chooses to do that, but I consider that quite a high degree of responsibility. So I think in a similar way, if people are making statements or putting themselves out there about weights, diet, marathon running, as long as they're sticking to their wheelhouse and they're providing enough caveats to moderate what they're saying, I think it's quite good. Like with yourself, just take you as an example, Steve. You do talk about marathon running. I've never once felt that the information you've put out has been excessively, dangerous, like in terms of like, you must do this, you must do that. And whenever you've spoken to me about running, because you've given me advice on running before as well, you've asked me to moderate myself in terms of my efforts. So that's an example to me of a good way of delivering a message. You know what it takes to run at the highest level, but also you know how to ease people into it. That's a balance. So you have the bulk of the message and you have the caveats. And I think when you and I are giving advice about diet, it's a similar kind of thing. You have the bulk of the message, eat in certain ways, whatever, and you have some caveats to say, actually, if you're going to go off the wagon or if you're going to push too hard, don't feel bad about it. So I think that's a nice way of putting the message across. That's how I would choose to do things if I was giving advice on whatever, eating or being lean.
Yeah, I think most in the fitness industry do just that. They do a good job of that. I think everybody, most people do a good job of that. There's some fringe people out there, but you put that in a very, very easy way to understand, easy way to process. When it comes to health and fitness, I think most voices are trying to do just that, including Doucette and Athlean X.
For sure. Sure. Hey, let me ask you another question, Steve. So when it comes to responsibilities for delivering messages, the other side of the argument, and I'm not saying I believe this, but the other side of the argument says the viewer actually should shoulder the majority of the responsibility for what they filter and how it comes across. So again, this goes back to the Greg Doucette thing. Like, Jeff's putting out this message, Greg's saying it's dangerous, or whatever he's saying. I've not seen the video. Should we place more emphasis on the viewer, and should we give more credit to the viewer to say, actually, you know what, they're grown men and women, they can make their own minds up? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm torn. I don't know. What is your take on that?
Well, there's a balance. We as content creators have to do our due diligence to make sure we present information that's reasonable and then sustainable in a healthy way. And once we do that, the burden is on the individual. And the individual can do with it or process it. We have no control over that. It is 100% on the individual, how they process it, how they interpret it. And I'm going to be honest here, as someone that has a career in this industry, written over 1,000 articles. I'm closing in on 3,000 videos. I'm going to be as real as it gets here. And this is not a criticism. This is reality. At least 33% of people do not actually listen to the information, do not actually properly digest it. A lot of times it's look at title, knee-jerk reaction. And in that light, it's not our responsibility to chase them down and educate them. If they are running reckless, and the burden is 100% on the viewer, what they do with it and what they choose and don't choose, which this is freedom, what they choose and don't choose to invest their time in and to digest or move on.
It makes it very difficult as a content creator, because you realize that people are going to mistake what you're saying at certain avenues of what you've said. So as you're putting your notes together for the video ends up getting more and more complicated because you're trying to preempt all the misconceptions that are going to come about. And then the complaint is your videos are too complicated, so you can't win.
Right. So no, I'm 100%. This each of us has our own responsibility, and we need to take this seriously. And as a society, we need to remind people it's your burden to carry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to sort of bookend the original question about sort of can somebody be too lean and set a bad example? I don't think we should turn around and judge people for living their lives as long as they're, being healthy. I mean, Jeff isn't unhealthily lean from what I can tell, and we can't really make that judgment unless we live with Jeff and sit in his kitchen. We just can't do it. We can say that we'd be too lean at that body weight or that body fat, but we can't say it from Jeff's perspective. I don't think we can do that. So I would say the person pointing the fingers and saying and judging others for being too lean, I think they're the problem in this case, because I've been on the receiving end of that, and it's not very nice. I've been on the receiving end of having those comments because it's apparently more socially acceptable to make comments about somebody being too lean, too muscular, too whatever, but it's not okay to make comments about negative traits. I think it's I think there's a double standard which I don't appreciate. So that's my bottom line on the original topic.
And somebody's going to jump in. This is just my final thoughts here, and say, we can't pass judgment on Jeff Cavalier. So we can't pass judgment on the 280-pound ripped Olympian. Yes, we can. There are degrees in this, and we are informed, intelligent individuals, hopefully. And there's a matter of degrees. When you look at a Jeff Cavalier, he's just a leaner, lighter guy. He doesn't really lift all that heavy. I don't see a lot of downsides. Whereas you look at a big Olympian, super ripped, taking a huge chemical soup. We know that just the heart having to carry around that mass is an inherent danger. So we need to understand there's a spectrum, because the spectrum always gets lost in discussions like this, and it becomes black or white. So there is certainly a spectrum, but in this case, I do not, I do not think Athlean X is setting a bad example. I think the burden is on his viewers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd also say I think where we slip into where it becomes a bad example is potentially where they're doing something unhealthy. So I can't remember the name of this guy, but there's a guy online who does eating challenges. He's very famous for that. I forget his name now, but he's really popular anyway. But he's just eating himself to death, basically. Now that, I would say that is setting a bad example, because he's doing something which is provably and visibly unhealthy. So I think that's where we kind of draw the line. Now, let's go the other direction, because I'm not just talking about people who are overweight, but what about people who are underweight? Let's say Jeff was to the point where, I don't wish this upon anyone, but let's just say Jeff or somebody like Jeff was to the point where they were so lean, they were so underweight, they were actually frail, and it was bad for their health. Now, that again, there's a cutoff point. So I think until you get to those cutoff points and somebody is actually visibly, provably unhealthy, I just don't think it's our business to cast judgment.
No, great discussion, and we'll cut it off here. We're at 27 minutes, so we won't drag anyone on any longer. Faz, I appreciate you joining me in discussion. If you guys watching have any comments, feel free to chime in. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Faz, tell us again where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, guys, go follow me on YouTube at Faz Lifts, and go check out my podcast on any major platform at Faz Lifts. Just come and say hello, drop a comment to one of my videos. I always answer back, so go ahead and do that, and I'll see you there.
All right, Faz, thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next time.